Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky. Andy Kamenetsky. Is Anthony Davis too fragile to play the five? You seem to think so, listeners. Talk about that next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. Always free, never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to get the podcast a little early. You can see it, particularly on non-game days. We get that thing posted up for you a little ahead of time, so a little value add there, plus all the fun stuff we do that you get to see. Want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a $100 instant deposit match up to a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So Tuesday's show, Andy, was centered, see what I did there, around Anthony Davis at the five. A lot of conversation about that based on what Darvin Ham was saying. I didn't even mean to. It just came out that way. It was not an intentional pun. But you know, so we spent, no, really, it wasn't. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. It's obviously a huge deal in terms of how the Lakers do stuff. And not surprisingly, particularly on the YouTube channel, there was a lot of reaction to it from people, particularly talking about the impact that playing center has on Davis's health. And given the importance of that this season, got people talking. So we'll talk about that as the show goes along. Before we do, though, you noticed something that I found wackadoodle crazy. Like when you sort of think about it in terms of waves arms about everything that has happened since this thing that you're about to tell us.
Of today, the day we are recording, Tuesday, you will hear this on Wednesday. 2 years ago, Tuesday,
October 11th,
won
2020.
The Lakers won the 2020 championship in the Orlando bubble. October basketball, as we've come to celebrate over the years. But like, it's only been 2 years, because of the weird NBA calendar. It's now going to be starting 3 seasons apart, but it's for so many different reasons related to the Lakers, related to basketball, related to the world at large. October 2020 feels not 2 years ago. It feels
2 million,
a lifetime ago, like multiple lifetimes ago.
And I didn't notice this because I've been running around all day. I've not been on social media. I haven't seen it. I just find that staggering. It feels like forever ago. And it what's amazing about it too, though, is where they were then, best team in basketball. And by the way, pretty clearly so. Like, they were not pushed very hard in that playoff run, generally speaking. They won that finals pretty handily, I think. Got some breaks, but every team does. To where they are now, which is not just, consensus fringy playoff team. And we can argue about that, and I'm sure we will over the course of the next week, but that's the general consensus. They're a 6-8 or something like that, play-in team, something like that. And even more so with a very cloudy future, like real cloudy. The path from where they were to where they are now, and like the forward look, is part of what makes that moment 2 years ago on Tuesday, basically 2 years ago, seem like so long ago, because the potential of that day seems so far away at this point.
Yeah, and obviously the weird timing of it all has to do with the pandemic and
Of
sports
course.
stopping and restarting. But the reason I bring that up is because beyond the fact that the world thankfully now feels very different than it did in 2020. It's still not back at a place where it feels pre-2020, but we are much closer to pre-2020
Right. I
than
mean,
in the thick of 2020.
I
But
don't even know what that means anymore in terms
sure.
of like getting back to normal. It's a different
Right.
conversation, but I understand what you're talking about.
Right. I mean, normal is going to have to be redefined and moving forward. But the reason I
Correct.
bring that up is the conditions of the pandemic, which in turn brought around the conditions of the NBA calendar, played a big role in prompting a lot of the decisions made by the organization. Like, for example, not looking to run back an NBA championship team because there was only like 2.5 months, if that, between the Lakers winning the championship and the new season beginning. So, for example, you end up trading Danny Green and a pick for Dennis Schroeder, which in the moment you and I both thought made, if nothing else, sense from a preservation standpoint. Danny Green is one of the people you would be concerned about running back under those type of conditions because of his age. Dennis Schroeder, we have the whole, fiasco of his exit from the team and the extension that he ultimately didn't take. That might come up later in this conversation over this show, which leads directly to bringing in Russell Westbrook, like all, which in turn leads to Kyle Kuzma and KCP not being here. Like all these different things in a lot of ways end up being brought about specifically because of the parameters that led the Lakers to winning a championship in October in the first place.
Yeah,
all these things are
you're
connected.
right. No, that's true. And I hadn't thought about it in that context necessarily.
I'm a
But
very
you're
deep
right.
thinker, Brian.
You are. You are. You always have been. And you're right. And that frames. If it also frames, I don't know if I'm how it fits into the idea of these sort of escalating. Panic is too strong a word, although maybe with the Westbrook, maybe not. I don't think what they did in the titles after the title season was panicking. I think that was.
No.
I am generally of the belief that you can never or almost never straight up run it back. You always need a little something that changes the dynamic of what you're trying to do because you can never completely recreate what it was that got you to that title. Something needs to be injected into that. There are exceptions, but that's my general belief. The real crux here, I think, is what happened after 2 seasons ago, after they lost to Phoenix in the first round. That to me is where the Lakers were really at a crossroads and had to think about, okay, what happened here? Were we closer to that team that was 21-6 and maybe we could almost run that back? Schroeder would have had to go. that relationship seemed.
They tried to run it back with Schroeder.
They tried. No, I mean it's a
separate
conversation, which we might touch on a little bit because Dennis touched on it earlier this week at practice. The question to me becomes, they wildly overreacted with the Westbrook deal. Wildly.
Or just wildly overrated the importance of stars. I mean, it may not have even been an overreaction in 2021.
Maybe.
It may have just been them.
Could be.
Look, this is an organization that always their first instinct is star bleeping.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always been. That is the ethos of this franchise, for better and worse. At times, it has definitely been for better, but it is what they do.
Yeah. But as I've always liked to put it, Russell Westbrook was just too much house. Much more square footage than they needed from a basketball standpoint. So how do the mistakes of last offseason inform this offseason, inform next offseason? That's what fascinates me and drives home again just how far away they are, as we kind of wrap this up, from that moment. And it just, like you say, feels like 10,000 years ago in part because who's on the team anymore?
It's LeBron,
Anthony Davis, and LeBron, right?
That's it.
Yes.
That's it. That's it. It was going.
That's the other part of it.
Was going to be THT for a hot minute, and then they traded him for Patrick Beverley. Like,
so much change in 2 calendar seasons. It's really hard to wrap your mind around it.
Well, I mean, there's been so much change and so much turnover that Dwight Howard and Rajon Rondo had second stints,
right?
One season removed from the championship, and they're both gone.
And they're both gone. Like, all right, let's. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of people for the rest of the day, but let's get to Anthony Davis in the 5. A lot of responses from people. We'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline, betonline.net, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores, the fastest, easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf, but of course, the NBA, because that's why the Locked On Lakers familia, you are even here. And maybe Brian and I think, generally strong preseason when the regulars have been playing has impressed the odds makers over at BetOnline, because the Lakers have gone from a 6-point underdog in their season opener against the Warriors to 5.5-point underdogs, or it could be because it's still TBD whether or not Draymond Green will be playing on that night because he punches teammates. LeBron is currently 14-1 to lead the league in scoring, 6th overall. Joel Embiid, the clubhouse favorite. So head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends in action, bet online where the game starts.
That's amazing, guys. Nobody's left, including the guys who returned.
Mm-hmm.
Staggering.
Yes,
staggering roster turnover.
Yes, it is.
And this, by the way, is the path that they're going to be on for the next couple of years, because that's the only, sort of the roster construction thing that they don't go out and be buying jerseys for people, folks, because
on general
real hard to get used to find a guy who's going to be here long enough to make that investment worth it.
On general principle, just like it's kind of like the inverse of, I went through this as a longtime smoker who eventually quit, like as a way of reverse breaking a habit. They have to re-sign Kendrick Nunn just on general principle. Like, he's like the only guy they can do this with. Like, they have to bring him back, even if he ends up getting hurt and misses in another season, just to get themselves back on track with retaining guys long-term.
I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the Austin Reeves thing this summer is going to be real interesting to watch too. All right. Anyway, let's.
Brian, I guess maybe just as a good time as any we wanted to note this one comment from Andrew Files on the YouTube page, because in terms of criticizing things that the organization has done, these Laker critics amuse me. 2 brothers who've been living off the Lakers and their Laker connections for years, criticizing the Lakers for something similar. LOL, vanilla calling the snow white.
I've never heard that expression, but I like it. I do like vanilla calling the snow white. It's the opposite, I guess, of the pot calling the kettle black.
Sure. Well, we're white guys, Brian.
That's right. I mean, I understood why he went in that direction, I think, but
he went racial.
Maybe. Maybe I don't. I don't know.
What Laker connections does he think we have? Like, does he think we're bus cousins or something?
Like, there's a lot about that comment that I don't entirely understand. I appreciate all of it. I mean, living off their Lakers and Lakers connections in the sense that we've covered the team and reported on them. But I mean, if we had real connections that we could leech off, we'd be much, much more complimentary to the team. Because then we can actually make money from it.
We'd be working inside that building, telling anybody who would listen that the Rambi are the greatest executives in all of sports.
Don't understand why people don't like Linda.
No, well, they don't know.
Great work. So,
I don't get that comment.
Thank you for leaving them, though. We do appreciate all of them that come through at the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel. So a great way to get yourself involved in the show.
As evidenced here, even if you criticize us.
Oh, yeah, we'll read the critical ones.
It's like we say about the show page on Apple. 5 stars. If you leave a 5-star review, going scorched earth about how bad this show is, we'll read it.
Yeah.
4 stars saying we're great, never going to read it.
On Tuesday's show, we spent a lot of time talking about Anthony Davis playing center. Darvin Ham made a point of noting that they are giving heavy consideration to that. I suspect we will see either Wednesday night or Friday night some experimentation with the Lakers using that small lineup that they hoped to use last week in Phoenix. They couldn't because Anthony Davis wasn't available. They played small, but they did it without AD. And so I think they'll try it with Anthony Davis and the full lineup before things get going. There are obvious benefits to it in terms of the being able to deploy the most talented members of the roster, which are loaded into the backcourt. I think we could all agree.
Certainly with the way they've been playing in the preseason, if nothing else.
Right. The centers have, relatively speaking, underwhelmed. And so, but that's where the best players are. And if you want to open up more minutes, Anthony Davis at the 5 is the easiest way to do it. One of the big responses that we got from many, many people, looking at on the YouTube page for Tuesday's show, is about fragility, though. The resistance to the idea of Anthony Davis moving to the 5. Craig Osterberg says if AD plays center, he'll eventually get hurt. Only use him in the center in the last 6 minutes of a game. Neo Titus, AD is too fragile for center. And over and over and over again, we saw comments like that. I get it, but I don't buy it.
No. First of all, there are not that many big centers in the NBA anymore to begin with. I mean, that matter. And you can obviously switch starting lineups, depending on matchups if needed. But the truth is, like, AD is just as likely to hurt himself playing the 4 or the 5. He is just as likely, in my opinion, this is something I've said for a while, and for what it's worth, last year we had Jeff Stotts, a very well-regarded sports injury expert, on a show, and I ran my theory past him that AD, I think, is more susceptible to getting hurt playing the 4 because defensively he has to run around so much, cover so much ground, go so balls to the walls doing that. Like, I think he is just as susceptible and vulnerable to an injury as being more primarily in the post with matchups of more physicality. And if nothing else, Stotts thought my theory is feasible. He didn't think it was silly.
And some of it gets used, how he's being used. It seems like with Darvin Ham, he's going to spend more time closer to the basket, no matter kind of where he's playing and all that. But Anthony Davis is going to get hurt. Again, unlearned church. Come on, guys. This conversation has been talked about for 8 years. AD is too fragile to play full-time center. John Minks, big mistake putting AD at the center. You risk losing him for the season if he turns an ankle or pulls a hamstring.
You don't think you can do that at the 4?
That's the thing. Anthony Davis is prone to injury because he is prone to injury. And short of just not playing him at all, there's no workaround that is positionally related. And this gets to, I think, the impetus on Ham to figure out ways to play him, to play other guys, to come up with schemes that protect him as much as possible. It's the inherent risk that comes with Davis at center. There are other reasons I think you could look at and say, maybe you do it, maybe you don't. Maybe, you want to maximize those centers. Maybe you want to try to, maybe for better defensive integrity with Damian Jones on the floor.
You think you can use more defensive versatility with AD at the 4? Like, there are
whatever.
There might be basketball reasons where you like him more as a 4 than a 5, and those may be totally legit.
I just don't think one has the bigger question is whether or not Davis feels like he is more likely to get hurt playing center than he is playing power forward, because to some degree, I think that impacts how you move, how aggressively you play, how you do stuff when you're on the floor. If you are more worried about getting hurt in one place on the floor versus another, assuming that's not the case, and the preferences have to do with how he plays defense, how he's deployed on offense, whatever it might be. And he's not really any more worried about injury at one place or another than there is no injury related reason, I think, to keep him at power forward versus keeping him at center. Sports medicine people out there can get back to it, but I don't think there's any connection.
No, I mean, especially when you take into account how much of AD's career has been spent with coaches and franchises bending over backwards, trying not to play him at center up until like the end of games, because that has been his stated preference, and how much AD keeps getting hurt anyway. If anything, what we're seeing is he might need to play center more to avoid getting hurt. But I mean,
possibly
the evidence is there. Playing him at the 4 does not prevent him from getting hurt.
Doesn't seem
there.
The Athletic has some interesting observations about the Lakers in their season preview that get to the decision tree that is currently facing them in terms of how to reshape the roster, when they might be able to do it with a Westbrook trade. Get to that next. So before we get to this preview, Dennis spoke on Monday, I believe it was, first time speaking in the media. I was asked about any potential hard feelings after being offered $84 million to stay, and he turned it down because he wanted, I believe, $100 million.
Or he thought he could get that in free agency.
Thought he could get it, right? He wanted more money from someone. He clearly didn't think that was his market value. He was incorrect. Vastly overstated his own market value there. He said that there is no hard feelings because at the end of the day, quote, there never was a contract. There never was a contract, never rejected anything. There you go.
Yeah. As Dave McMenamin at ESPN, our friend, reported in his piece about this, semantics may be coming into play. Quote, a source familiar with the negotiation between Schroeder's representative at the time, and that's interesting, at the time, and the Lakers told ESPN that when LA broached a conversation about an extension in February 2021, Schroeder's side said they'd rather wait until the offseason to discuss a deal. Schroeder is technically correct that he did not turn down, I guess, a formally drawn up extension. Like, there were no papers put in front of him, but you don't put papers in front of somebody that keeps saying, I won't sign them. So he may not have formally turned anything down, but it's very similar to.
He clearly screwed that up. But like, he made fun of himself, on Instagram. He did all that stuff. And I mean, the bigger question is, does any of this matter now at this point? I mean, I'm inclined to say, if there were hard feelings between the Lakers and Schroeder, he wouldn't be here. I mean,
right.
I don't, after the European Championships and all that, the way he played, people were reporting, I remember Mark Stein writing about this, there was some interest in bringing Schroeder back, and probably could have found a minimum deal with a different team. So I don't see this as a big deal from a basketball standpoint. It's people think it's kind of funny because Schroeder is a little bit odd and definitely kind of disagreeable. But people for some reason just really like when guys screw these sorts of things up and lose out on tons and tons of money. But I can't imagine it's going to really have any impact on the Lakers, like a negative impact, because like Schroeder's attitude is going to be problematic or something like that. I don't see that as a problem this year.
I mean, only if just the general pressure and mindset that can happen. And I think we even saw this with Schroeder 2 years ago, when guys are in contract years, that can be very touchy. Like, with Golden State, for example, whether or not you think Draymond punched Jordan Poole specifically because he's pissed off because he thinks Jordan Poole's about to get his extension, and Draymond's extension even before that punch was tenuous, there's no question that the issue of Draymond's extension has been hanging over this team, and that becomes a touchy thing. It's always because he can opt out of his deal right now, or this coming off season, be a free agent. That stuff is always a thing. Like, people can talk all the time about how it's a business, it's not personal. It's always personal when it's your money.
Right.
It always
But that, even that though, in the context of Schroeder, is different than,
sure.
like, Schroeder is, oh, I want to play well enough and play enough to be able to get stay in the league, if nothing else, for next year, maybe get, somebody's mid-level or something like that. That's independent though. That's specific to his circumstances as a 1-year guy, as opposed to having lingering resentment towards the Lakers over how his last contract negotiation went.
That's probably true, but it'll just be interesting to see how, if at all, that situation manifests itself.
Well, and that's true
over the course of a season.
80% of the roster last year and this year and every year going forward. John Hollinger, in his preview for the Lakers at The Athletic, noted that the Lakers kind of have a situation where they are making choices about how they want to go forward. They've obviously not traded Russell Westbrook. They could choose to hang on to him and go into the offseason with cap space, as Hollinger notes. And I have noted that doesn't necessarily buy you tons and tons of talent, and you'd still have to fill out the back end of the roster with minimum level guys. For the most part, you could trade people into that cap space. You do have some options. You could also hope to see later in the season if the price for moving Westbrook goes down, and maybe you can either make a deal that is lateral to the Indiana deal that they've thus far been turning down. Maybe San Antonio offers something, and that you might be able to use at a lower cost, whatever it might be, but something where you get to keep the picks, or at least a pick or something going forward. You've posed an interesting question to this. Like, what is too late in the season to make a move, to make it useful, to make it so the players you get back can be integrated into the lineup in a way that gives you a better chance of winning? How many games left in the season do you need? Obviously, it depends on who you get back, but broadly speaking, sort of, is that your concern, that you just won't get guys back fast enough that even if you make a good trade, it'll matter?
Yeah, I think, save bringing in like a disgruntled superstar who wants to be moved, and you're talking about somebody who is such a good fit with such a high talent that you can bypass a lot of the typical getting to know you period that goes on with bringing in guys mid-season. I just feel like if you wait till the deadline, you are essentially punting on this season. Now, you could be, however, souping up the 2023-2024 season in a way that is better than any way you possibly could by, say, trading for a Buddy Hield and Miles Turner 3 weeks from now or whatever. Like, you might feel this player to be named later, to be determined later, could potentially have a bigger impact than those two guys. And maybe it's the higher risk, higher reward principle coming into play. But what I think is really interesting about all this, Brian, is just the idea that, other than just saying, screw it, and trading both picks with Russ for Hield and Turner, either right now or a couple weeks from now, essentially at the start of the season, all of these other options are varying degrees of unknowns. You don't know exactly what you're going to be getting. As much planning as you're doing, as many different scenarios you can put up on your whiteboard in Rob Pelinka's office, the truth is you don't know what's going to be ahead of you. So they're all varying degrees of a dangerous game.
To me, it just points to the difficulty that they're in. Like, there's no good option. This is they are in Argo space. You hope to make the best of it. What I really think, the biggest problem with the Indiana deal, I think, and what I think they looked at it and said is, yes, we can make this trade. Yes, it makes us better. It probably locks us into a 6 seed for the next 4 years. Like, the ability to get better than that once we sort of fire this bullet for that trade. It's not that it's a bad trade. It's not that it doesn't make us better, but it doesn't really get us where we're going. And so what's the difference? Or where we want to go, I should say. So what's the difference? Finding that path is going to be very hard. So I think a lot of these they flip the paradigm that the Lakers are used to and Lakers fans demand, which is, what can you do to make us a championship caliber team? A lot of this is damage control. How can we avoid making a mistake to make the problem worse? and make ourselves as competitive as possible while trying not to make the problem worse. This is all fall. This is why the Westbrook trade was such a massive gamble, because the downside was tangible and undoing it was really hard. So I tend to be a little less worried about that. I think if they can make a good trade, if they can do something that benefits them, it probably. People will say you're punting on this season, and I get it. I guess you sort of are, but the season is to some degree pre-punted if you only believe that a championship is the only thing that you can possibly play for to make it interesting. Because I think if everything even goes well, I think they could be better. They'll do better than last year. I think they could surprise some people. The early preseason indications are strong, and all the things that we've talked about since the preseason began. But there's still a cap realistically to what can happen. If you add Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, by the way, if those things are happening, it means probably Westbrook's doing okay. So that mitigates the impact of a Westbrook trade because you're replacing something that at least was kind of working. If it's a disaster, that's a completely different question. But I think the top upside for that trade is still probably a 5 seed or a 4 seed, at the most. And then you're at the most, and you're really hoping that you need everything to go right and that other things. So if punting means not giving yourself a chance to win a championship, realistically, like a real chance, we may have punted already. I'm not sure there's a trade out there that does that. So just wait and do the thing that you think is best. Or if you have to wait until next offseason because that turns into the best path, so be it. I don't like it. I want the team to be good. I want them to be competitive. I want them to surprise, because we do a podcast 5 days a week on Locked On Lakers. And it's much more interesting and more fun when the team is playing for something meaningful. But that's a separate issue from what is best for the long-term interests of the franchise.
You can't cosplay contender, no matter how much you want to try to message it.
Nope. Locked On Lakers on YouTube, where you go to see the show, and you get it a little early. We appreciate all the support the channel's getting. We are going to push our way towards 9,000 subscribers with your help and the help of everyone else in the Lakers internet sphere. And we'll see what happens on Wednesday night. There could be a lot to talk about off of the Minnesota game, depending on what the Lakers do and how Darvin Ham puts out a lineup tonight. So plenty to come for Thursday and Friday. I'll see everybody tomorrow.